Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says the international community should oppose extremist and xenophobic ideologies. In a virtual address to the 20th summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Khan says Pakistan has been on the forefront of the struggle against terrorism for a long time. He asserts that the world should speak out against unilateral actions in occupied territories. Touching upon other regional issues, the Prime Minister reiterates there is no military solution to the conflict in Afghanistan. Indian troops martyred two civilians in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The youths were killed during a military operation in the Shopian district. The valley has been under a curfew and communications blackout since India revoked its special status in August last year. Armenia, Azerbaijan and Russia have signed an agreement to end 6 weeks of fierce fighting in NagornoKarabakh. Under the deal, Armenia has agreed to give 3 regions around Karabakh to Azerbaijan. Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has described the development as painful, but Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev calls it a historic day. One of the most prominent Palestinian political figures, Saeb Erekat, has died of COVID-19 at the age of 65. He was a veteran peace negotiator and international spokesman for the Palestinians for more than 30 years. Erekat was Secretary General of the Palestine Liberation Organization and an advisor to President Mahmoud Abbas. The US has become the first country to cross 10 million COVID-19 cases with over 238,000 fatalities. India's death toll has reached over 127,000, while the infections tally is nearing 8.6 million. Pakistan has reported over 1,600 cases and 23 deaths in a day as the toll hits 7,000. Globally, the virus has claimed over 1.26 million lives and infected nearly 51 million people. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says the international community should oppose extremist and xenophobic ideologies. In a virtual address to the 20th summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Khan says Pakistan has been on the forefront of the struggle against terrorism for a long time. He asserts that the world should speak out against unilateral actions in occupied territories. Touching upon other regional issues, the Prime Minister reiterates there is no military solution to the conflict in Afghanistan. Khan lauded the efforts of the SCO in promoting regional connectivity, saying it is the only way forward to peace and prosperity. Indian troops have martyred 2 more civilians in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The youths were killed during a military operation in the Shopian district. The operation in Kotpura area was jointly launched by the Indian Army and the Central Reserve Police Force. Following the operation, Indian authorities suspended internet service in 2 districts. The valley has been under a curfew and communications blackout since India revoked its special status in August last year. Armenia, Azerbaijan and Russia have signed an agreement to end 6 weeks of fierce fighting in Nagorno-Karabakh. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his Turkish counterpart Mevlut Cavusoglu discussed the deal by phone. More in this report. The Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, which simmered for decades despite international efforts to mediate, erupted into fresh fighting in late September. Ceasefires have failed in the past 6 weeks. As of today, Azerbaijan, Armenia and Russia have reached a new deal to end the conflict that has left over 1,200 people dead. In a televised meeting, Russian President Vladimir Putin confirmed the total ceasefire.
Today on November 9, President of Republic of Azerbaijan Ilham Aliyev, Prime Minister of Republic of Armenia Nikol Pashinyan and President of Russian Federation signed a statement which declares the complete ceasefire and any military action in Nagorno-Karabakh war zone starting from midnight of November 10, 2020 Moscow time. The Azerbaijan Republic and the Republic of Armenia stop at the present positions.
Under the deal, Azerbaijan keeps its territorial gains and Armenia has agreed to give 3 regions around Nagorno-Karabakh to Baku. Azeri President Ilham Aliyev said the historic agreement showed it was a clear defeat of Armenia. Aliyev said Armenia signed the agreement due to Baku's iron fist, not Yerevan's own will. He also announced a Turkish and a Russian joint peacekeeping mission in Karabakh. As part of the deal, Russia has deployed its peacekeeping troops to the mountain enclave of the region. In Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, news of the agreement brought people onto the streets to celebrate despite a curfew. But in Armenia, the agreement sparked outrage, with protesters storming Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's official residence in Yerevan. They called for the PM to step down after he announced the painful deal.
In the existing situation, there was no chance of making another decision. I plan to tell more details, why it was made and what was the reason behind the last month's events. I can't do it right now for one simple reason, because stopping military actions are in the main process right now, and if I say something, I can endanger people.
Meanwhile, there are disputed accounts coming out of Armenia. The Defense Ministry says military actions in Nagorno-Karabakh have ceased completely, but Prime Minister Pashinyan says they were not over yet. One of the most prominent Palestinian political figures, Saeb Erekat, has died after contracting COVID-19 virus. Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh announced the 65-year-old chief Palestinian negotiator's death at Hadassah Medical Center in Jerusalem. Officials said Erekat contracted coronavirus on October the 8th. He was put on a ventilator after undergoing a medically induced coma before death. Erekat was Secretary General of the Palestine Liberation Organization and an advisor to President Mahmoud Abbas. Erekat has served as the Palestinians' chief negotiator in peace talks with Israel for the past 2.5 decades. He also helped negotiate the landmark Oslo Accords in 1993, which helped creating the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. US President Donald Trump's campaign has filed a lawsuit in Pennsylvania challenging President-elect Joe Biden's win. The lawsuit targets Pennsylvania's Secretary of State and county boards over allegations of unfair elections. Moving on, the international community has criticized the U.S. over its human rights record during a UN rights review. From the detention of migrant children to the killing of unarmed black people during the Trump administration, participants highlighted what they called a grim record of human rights in the United States.
During the half-day session, activists called on President-elect Joe Biden to usher in reforms. China and Russia called on the U.S. to eradicate structural racism and police violence. France demanded the halt of executions at the federal level and the closure of Guantanamo Bay prison. The UK called for ensuring access to comprehensive sexual and reproductive health services. Venezuela and Cuba said the world superpower must provide equal access to healthcare amid a pandemic. Over a dozen countries voiced concern at Washington's position on family planning. Addressing a news briefing, Director of the Human Rights Program at the American Civil Liberties Union said the session was an unsurprising condemnation of Washington's human rights record. Defending U.S. policies, Assistant Secretary of State said U.S. presence in the session exhibited its commitment to human rights.
The Taliban called on U.S. President-elect Joe Biden to stick to the Doha deal to withdraw American troops from Afghanistan. In a statement, the group said the agreement is the most reasonable and effective tool for ending the Afghan conflict. The Taliban said they are committed to all the terms of the deal. They added the group also wants to build positive relations with the U.S. and all the countries of the world. At least 4 policemen have been killed in a car bomb attack in Afghanistan's Faryab province. Police say 20 people were wounded in the attack. The provincial governor said the chief of the district police is also among those wounded. He blamed the Taliban for the attack. No group has claimed the responsibility for the attack in the Almar district. China says U.S. sanctions on 4 Chinese officials in Hong Kong is a serious violation of international law. Washington imposed these curbs over their alleged role in the Hong Kong crackdown. At a news briefing, a foreign ministry spokesman termed the move blatant interference in the city's affairs. Wang Wenbin urged Washington to immediately reverse the move and not go further down the wrong path. Hong Kong Chief Secretary Matthew Cheung dismissed the sanctions, saying they will not be intimidated. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the sanctions bar officials from traveling to the U.S. He added their U.S. assets would also be blocked. The U.S. Treasury Department has imposed sanctions on another 19 Syrian individuals and entities. The department says those who provided support to Bashar al-Assad's regime's oil production network are blacklisted. In a statement, the department said it imposed curbs on intelligence officers, including the head of the Syrian Air Force Intelligence. The department said it also took action against Lebanese persons attempting to revive Syria's petroleum industry. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said implementing a nationwide ceasefire in Syria remains the only path forward. He said the Assad regime has a choice to take irreversible steps towards a peaceful resolution of the conflict or face further sanctions. Russian President Vladimir Putin says Syrian refugees who fled the civil war should start returning home to help rebuild the country. During a video call with his Syrian counterpart Bashar al-Assad, Putin said large parts of the Arab country enjoy peace. Putin said international terrorism has been almost wiped out and return to civilian life should begin gradually. Putin's comments came ahead of a 2-day international conference on refugees in Damascus set to begin on Wednesday. Al-Assad said the conference will only be the beginning to solve this humanitarian problem. He added the main obstacle for the return of the refugees are Western sanctions, which he described as illegitimate and unjust. Syria's 9-year conflict has killed over 500,000 people and forced about 5.6 million to flee abroad as refugees. In Iraq, 2 security personnel have been killed and 6 wounded in a roadside bomb explosion in northern Kirkuk province. In a statement, Iraq's military said the bomb detonated near a military vehicle in Kirkuk village. The blast occurred one day after 11 people were killed and 8 wounded in an attack on a military post in the capital. Earlier, the Iraqi security forces carried out a series of airstrikes against ISIS in a recently launched offensive. In Jordan, polls have opened in the parliamentary elections amid a surge in the coronavirus cases. More than 4.5 million people are eligible to vote in 23 constituencies for 130 contested seats. 15 seats of the parliament are reserved for women, 9 for Christians, and 3 for minority Chechens and Circassians. Politicians have been appealing to Jordanians to turn out and vote amid widespread calls for a boycott of the tribal-dominated assembly. However, the reported turnout is disappointingly low. Jordan is facing its worst economic crisis in years, with unemployment and poverty exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Ethiopian military has seized an airport in Tigray's town of Humera. The town is located near the borders with Sudan and Ethiopia. The state media says the action is a continuation of the military response against the Tigray People's Liberation Front. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed says he is not disregarding international calls for calm. A government spokesperson says the Prime Minister acknowledges international concerns, but Tigray conflict is an internal matter. She added the Ethiopian government will ultimately make decisions in the long-term interests of the country and its people. Earlier, Sudanese media reported several Ethiopians, including soldiers, are fleeing to neighboring countries as the conflict intensifies. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The US has become the first country to cross 10 million COVID-19 cases with over 238,000 fatalities. Globally, the coronavirus has claimed over 1.26 million lives and infected nearly 51 million people. More in this report.
Over the last 24 hours, the world has seen two completely dichotomous scenarios related to the coronavirus pandemic. On one hand, the United States hit the grim milestone of infections mark. Two top vaccine developers have lit the beacons of hope. After the reassuring announcement of Pfizer and BioNTech, the World Health Organization called for faith in science. Experts worldwide have also welcomed the breakthrough as watershed moment in which indicates that vaccines can help halt the pandemic.
Well, my initial reaction, of course, was light at the end of the tunnel. A bit of good news, something to make us smile, because cases of COVID are going up around the country, which doesn't make us smile.
The United Kingdom's Prime Minister Boris Johnson, however, says it is still too early to rely on the COVID-19 vaccine. British Deputy Chief Medical Officer also seconds the Prime Minister, saying it does not see the vaccine making any difference for the second wave the United Kingdom is in now. In Russia, officials claim that their Sputnik V vaccine is also more than 90% effective. Meanwhile, Brazil has suspended clinical trials for China's Sinovac vaccine due to its adverse effects that occurred late last month. Like the rest of the Eurozone, Hungary is also set to introduce new curbs to stem the exceptional spike in cases. In France, authorities say the country is at a crucial moment as the peak of the outbreak is still to be seen.
You know it. A massive second wave is hitting the northern hemisphere, the United States, Russia, and Europe. The epidemic is progressing in Europe and France at different speeds depending on the countries and territories. All the regions of France are impacted.
Over in Asia, China has reported 22 new cases overnight. India's death toll has reached over 127,000, while the virus has infected 8.5 million people so far.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he has tested positive for the novel coronavirus. In a tweet, the president said he will isolate himself but will continue working. Minutes after Zelensky's announcement, Ukraine's head of the presidential office also said he had tested positive for the virus. Last week, the health minister said the coronavirus situation in the country was close to catastrophic. Earlier, Zelensky said Ukraine may introduce a lockdown at weekends in an effort to curb the pandemic. Ukraine has so far recorded over 483,000 COVID-19 cases with nearly 9,000 deaths. In Pakistan, 23 people have died from COVID-19 in the last 24 hours, increasing the toll to 7,000. The health ministry says 1,637 people tested positive for the virus overnight. The ministry said out of over 346,000 cases detected so far, 319 people have recovered. It said there are more than 20,000 active cases in the country, with over 1,000 in critical condition. Amid the second wave, the authorities have imposed an array of stricter restrictions across the country. Pakistan-Russian Federation Special Forces joint exercise, the Ruzba 5, is underway in Tarbela area of Haripur district. In a statement, Pakistan's military's media wing said the exercise is aimed at sharing both armies' expertise in counter-terrorism. It said the participating troops are busy in practicing counter-terrorism drills and procedures rappelling, and preparations for skydiving. The ISPR said sports activities are also part of the exercise. The exercise, dubbed the Druzhba 5, will continue for 2 weeks. Earlier, Russian ambassador to Pakistan, Daniel Ganich, and senior officials from both the countries reviewed the exercise. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. The US has expressed disappointment about the European Union's decision to impose tariffs on American goods. Earlier, EU executive Walt Disney said the bloc will impose penalties on an array of US imports. US Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer said the EU has long proclaimed its commitment to the World Trade Organization's rules. In a statement, Lighthizer added today's announcement shows Brussels only follows WTO rules when convenient to them. The European Union is pushing ahead with a plan to hit $4 billion of American goods with tariffs. The bloc says it still hopes to settle the fight, with both the sides agreeing to drop countermeasures. Walt Disney says it is furloughing additional workers from its theme park in Southern California. In a memo, Disneyland said it still does not know when the state will allow it to reopen because of the coronavirus pandemic. Disney officials said the additional furloughs would affect the executives, salaried and hourly workers, but the numbers were not provided by the company. Disneyland said it hoped to get the employees back to work once it eventually reopens. The decision comes on top of the 28,000 employees who were laid off in September. Most all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.